Journey begins. Let us understand the devastating effects of nuclear power that was trapped as a dark event in our history. Let us watch the video together. At morning, American Boeing flight was flying around the city of Hiroshima. It dropped the bomb. Its bomb took around 43 seconds to fall. It caused around 80,000 deaths instantly, making the temperature rise around 40,000. This led to devastating effect and devastating death. Now, let us talk about World War II. In year 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. There were two powers at that time which we will talk about. Countries involved as a powers were Allied powers and Axis powers. What are Allied powers and what is Axis powers? Allied powers, under Allied powers, which country falls? Under Axis powers, which countries are there? Let us understand that. Under Allied powers, there were Great Britain, Soviet Union, and USA. Under Axis powers, there were Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, let us understand how exactly the war started. Around the year 1900s, imperialism was followed in Japan. As the terminology imperialism, they wanted to conquer different lands and have authority over them. For the interesting fact here is the Emperor Higehito was very ambitious. He wanted to occupy different lands and he had a greater idea or greater ambition of achieving the goal of Greater Asia. Greater Asia, in the sense, occupying all the Asian territories, major Asian countries such as Burma, Thailand, French Indochina, and merging together as a Greater Asia. The idea behind colonizing or occupying such territories was to exploit their resources. Now, let us understand further details. He had an eye in the region of Indochina, that is near Thailand, French Indochina. It was under French Indochina colony. So, if he invaded this territory, he would directly oppose Allied powers. Fearing that USA might defeat him, what he did was the chain of events that happened. Now, after occupying the this region, that is French Indochina, he attacked and occupied it. But what were the consequences which he faced? Let us understand that. US was observing at that time in Europe, Hitler was occupying, invading different territories. On the other hand, in Asia, Emperor Higehito was performing the same. So, to stop this, US decided for negotiation. They negotiated with Japan. They demanded them to stop invading others' territory, but not to avail. He, the emperor's attitude was, "I really don't want to listen to you." So, US decided to take some economic action over Japan. First, they stopped their export of cast iron, copper, and steel, which were the important resources at that time. So, what happened was, to cover up this problem, the emperor decided to invade Singapore and Malaysia at that time. Singapore and Malaysia. Malaysia was under British colony and Indonesia was under Dutch colony. It was Dutch East Indies at that time. So he thought of attacking that regions and using and for covering up these resources. But US further took another economic action where they completely stopped exporting oil to Japan. And let me remind you, 80% of oil was given by US to Japan. And it was, if this resource was stopped, it will be a greater problem for Japan. So they tried to invade these territories, as I mentioned, that is Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia at that time. Malaysia was under British, Indonesia was under Dutch. So, as these countries were part of Allied powers, so what he decided was he will secretly invade Philippines and extract oil from there. But to do that, he was under the fear that US might attack them. So before US could attack, he Japan planned on attacking US first. The famous Pearl Harbor attack, which was done by Japan on 7th December 1941. They secretly attacked Pearl Harbor and 350 Japanese air attacks happened, which killed 2,000 plus US military individuals. And by attacking them, they successfully occupied Philippines. They successfully conquered Philippines. But at what cost? Let us understand that. Once this attack happened, US was triggered. US President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war against Japan. Britain as well joined. Let us understand the timeline of events. Here, war begins. Around the year 1941, the World War II was at full swing. In year 1943, the Italy surrendered. Further, in year 1945, Hitler died by suicide. US President Franklin Roosevelt as well died on 12th April 1945. But even after the chain of events proceeded, Japan denied to surrender. It led to Battle of Okinawa, which is still considered as the bloodiest battle in history, as it killed 12,000 plus soldiers and 1 lakh of Okinawan soldiers. That means 25% of population of Okinawan island died. Let me talk about a tradition in Japan which was twisted and turned. The concept of samurai. They say that instead of surrendering, give up your life. That means promoting suicide culture, which was heavily negative. Here, the kamikaze attacks in Battle of Okinawa happened. That means what? That is suicide bombings were happening. Let us understand what it is. Different pilots were asked to take their airships and directly go and attack the enemy ships. That means directly blasting their ship over the enemy ship and giving up their life. So, the samurai culture, the people of Japan were highly brainwashed that giving life for the emperor is for greater good, which was totally wrong. Now, Japan was adamant on surrendering, people were dying. Further, the chain of events proceeded after the death of Franklin Roosevelt, US President. Henry Truman became the President of US. He tried to negotiate with Japan, but it didn't work. So, during that time, there were different minds that collaborated in Manhattan Project, which we will be talking about in detail in further lecture. Here, what happened was in Manhattan Project, the concept of nuclear bomb, that is atomic bomb, was developed. 16th July 1945 was the first test trial and which was successful. Now, after the warning, let us talk about the warning which was given. The Allied forces gave the warning, that is Potsdam Declaration. First warning was given on 26 July. In this demand, they were asking for unconditional surrender from Japan. Truman, US President Truman, Chinese President, and UK President were involved in this declaration. But Japanese Emperor, attitude was somewhat like this. Nobody cares. He didn't care about that. He was really adamant for his control over the occupied areas. He denied the Potsdam Declaration. He wanted power in his colonies and was not ready to give up on his power. For the greed of power which he had to pay a lot amount of price in future. Let us see how.
The horrific dropping of 2 nuclear bombs. What did it look like? In the early morning hours of August 6, 1945, an American bomber took flight from the secluded island of Tinian and headed towards his first fateful target, the bustling city of Hiroshima. Upon reaching the city, the pilot released the heinous atomic bomb, a weapon that would alter the course of history forever. The bomb detonated with an unimaginable cataclysmic release of energy. In a hauntingly horrific scene, the very fabric of flesh dissolved like melting butter as 70,000 people were instantly erased from existence. Buildings collapsed like fragile sandcastles, and the city burnt like hellfire. Believe it or not, the Japanese still did not surrender, leading to a second tragic event. 3 days later, the Americans dropped another atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki. Another 40,000 people were wiped in an instant, leaving Japan with just one single option: defeat.
The price they had to pay was very big. After the first bombing, as it was mentioned earlier, they were not ready to surrender. Their attitude was they just have one bomb and they cannot do anything. But when the second bomb was dropped in Nagasaki, which was little boy, it almost wiped out 95% civilians. But here the twist was in Nagasaki, the warning was given prior and evacuation was done. So, life loss compared to Hiroshima was lesser as there were mountain regions that covered the explosion. Yet, Japanese Supreme Council sat and voted. Finally, after the final vote, the Japanese government, Japanese Supreme Council surrendered in front of Soviet Union and US. At the same time, when the explosion happened, after half an hour or so, there was a rain. 95% of healthcare facilities was destroyed. Because of that, no health facilities was available for the victims of this bomb blast. When the rain started, the toxic air which was accumulated in the atmosphere came down in the water droplets as black color tar water, and it caused a lot amount of health issues and radiation sickness among the population who were survivors. So, even after surrendering, even after paying the high price, still, was it worth that ambition preceded the morality is the question to be addressed. Thank you.